I'm a third-generation Italian-American.
Everybody wants to be Italian. There's two types of people, those who are and those who want to be.
My grandparents were born in the North End. They lived on Margaret Street, right up the street here. Back then, the North End is considered one of the best and largest Little Italies in the country.
I used to live on Foster Street, then I moved to Henchman Street.
I grew up at 153 Endicott Street.
I grew up on number 90 Prince Street. It was above the Economy Meat Market.
We had like 33,000 people living in a small area like this.
This street was probably the most densely populated street in the country. In one building alone, there was 110 people that lived in it.
Growing up here as a kid, I couldn't ask for a better childhood.
It was wonderful. A lot of families.
I was born here 84 years ago, and I'm still here.
The North End is home. The North End is comfortable. But now it's changed. It isn't like it used to be.
This was a beautiful place one time. Now it's all yuppie-ish, you know what I'm saying?
The neighborhood Catholic high school, right? The Archdiocese sold the school, $1 million condos. Now I walk down the street, I don't know who's who. The North End became more like a campus.
Young college kids. They're here to have a party and that's it. Give us a break.
The North End is still one of the best places on earth.
Today it stinks.
I love the friendliness of the North End, spirit of allegiance. That's still here.
Some of us are left, but the values are gone.
People moving in here, it's changing, and you sense a lot of resentment.
Today, it's much different, but I think better.
Hi, I'm Stephen Passacantilli. I am fourth generation in my family to call the streets of the North End my home.
Dennis, what's up, buddy?
Today I'm going to take you on a journey of my neighborhood and show you all the things that make me proud to be from the North End. The North End is a story about food, feasts, friendships, culture, and most important, family.
This corner here, when we were kids, we used to hold races here. Because if you look at the way the buildings are structured, they're in a triangle. So what we used to do, one kid would run down House Street, and one kid would run down Snowhill Street, and run around the triangle. Whoever came back first won the race.
When we used to live here, we used to sled down here in the winter, right into Knott Street, almost kill ourselves when we did it. This is kind of where all the Sicilian fishermen kind of lived. This is this local area.
This is where I grew up. And we played ball over here. This was the home plate right here. You believe it or not. And like I said, we called Webster, this is called Webster Place.
That's my apartment right there, the second floor.
And how long did you live there?
Oh, that's the bulk of my childhood memories were there. I'd say at least 30 years. It was always a vibrant corner.
Boston was founded by English Puritans in 1630. They built the city on a small peninsula, and from the beginning, a tight community formed at its north end. The earliest residents, English and African, built up a neighborhood of fine houses, busy shipyards, and beautiful churches. This made the North End a popular and prosperous place by the American Revolution. After the war, the North End lost its prestigious status and came to be regarded as a slum. It also became a melting pot of different immigrant groups, with Italians and Sicilians becoming the majority by the early 20th century.
The Genoese were the first immigrants that came here. They were a merchant class for the most part. They're the ones that owned the salumeria, the grocery stores, and the import businesses and things of that sort.
Early on, the Genoese had settled around the North Bennett Street area. They operated pushcarts that grew into small businesses and shops, some of which became major American producers of Italian foods. A notable example is the Pastine Company.
Luigi Pastine, or Pastene, came to Boston in 1848 and support his family. Started with a pushcart in the Italian section of Boston. That company grew as a fruit and produce company, and that company was started on Fulton Street in the North End. Pastine is 140 years old this year.
While life for the Genoese was difficult, and not all achieved the success of the Pastine family, most prospered through their small shops that served the thousands of Southern Italians who arrived later, and who by the 1920s were over 90% of the population of the North End.
Where Jews and Irish came into the North End for the purpose of leaving, of using it as a springboard to gain access to this country. Italians didn't.
Italians left southern Italy by the millions because the economy is in terrible, terrible shape, shambles. About 15 million people leave southern Italy. It's a stunning number of people. The economy collapses as a result of some terrible weather. There are natural disasters, Mount Vesuvius, Mount Etna, huge earthquake in Messina, all these things kind of converging.
Almost half of southern Italy migrated to America. And those that came to the North End really had to have had it very difficult, spending all of their money on passage over. They gave up their homes, they left their parents, never to see, in many cases, never to see them again.
My grandmother left. She was 13 years old when she left Italy. And all she had was one small, little hand carry-on case. And when I asked her several times, I had a very good relationship with my grandmother. She would say she did come here so that they would have a better life, that there was a lot of poverty in Italy, and basically they ate what they grew, and things were not as good as they were in the United States.
My mother was born in the province of Caltanissetta in Sicily.
She was a very young girl when she came here. In 1920, she was 3 years old. She made a transatlantic journey with her two sisters, my Aunt Rose and my Aunt Jenny, and my grandmother, Mama Nuzza. It was a long, arduous journey. When they finally got here from Sicily, my grandfather was awaiting them and took them to a little apartment on Unity Street, where they lived for a short while before they moved to 452 Hanover Street. That's where she met my father.
They worked very hard. They worked as common laborers to make a home for themselves.
My grandfather he used to sell nuts on a pushcart. And I used to go underneath the bed and take the nuts, take them for myself.
My grandfather, he was a foreman at the chicken factory on Richmond Street. And I can remember as a kid going with my grandmother to get chickens. He'd say, hey, Benel, I got a chicken for you. So he'd bring a chicken over, and she'd make sure there was an egg inside the chicken, because that was the gift. That was the bonus, if you will. It's having some fresh eggs out of the chicken.
My grandfather on my father's side worked for the tea, actually. And my grandfather on my mother's side was a laborer, because he was a big, strapping man. No education. So that's what he did. He worked with his hands.
My father was a commercial fisherman. When I was a child, we always ate unusual fish. Monkfish, skate, catfish. We make fish cakes out of them. Now they're very popular, but when we were kids, they weren't popular. They only had haddock and cod, but everything else we had all kinds of other kinds of fish.
Tons of women worked, and they worked in curtain factories. My grandmother worked in Johnson & Johnson. It was her job to fill nuts in a jar. Back then it had to be manual, because that's what she did.
My grandmother and my aunt were chocolate dippers in a factory in the South End on Albany Street. All I remember is we always had boxes of chocolate on our coffee table.
And we know how to tell what's in the box because she taught us what the swirls mean.
Yeah.
My mother's grandmother and grandfather lived in that building right there where Limoncello's is. My great-grandfather, Joe Langone, he was the first Italian-American elected to the state Senate. And his wife, she was the head of immigration, which was a big deal back then because people were coming in from Italy and stuff. So, I mean, my mother says when she was a kid, there'd be lines, there'd be people waiting in line to go upstairs and see them. She, she helped people become citizens. So that's my great-grandmother. Another prominent North Ender was Felix Forte, who would become the first Italian-American to serve on the Massachusetts Superior Court. Forte was also the presiding judge at the trial of the famous Brinks robbery case, which happened at 165 Prince Street on January 17, 1950.
My father was Felix Forte. His mother never learned a word of English. He was the interpreter for the family. He's the one who went to school, very bright student. And I know he used to make money by jumping on the running boards in the North End and giving tourists history of the Paul Revere house, and he'd get a quarter or a nickel or something, and then he'd jump on the next running board.
When you saw a car or a bus or a cab, we used to holler, my cab, my bus, and the first person that said it got dibs on saying the history of Paul Revere to that. This is the home of Paul Revere. Paul Revere was married twice. He had 16 children, 11 girls, and 5 boys. On the door stands 144 handmade spikes. The last 3 were knocked off by the British. Next to the door is a hitching post. That's where Paul Revere tied his horse. On the shutters, you'll see a half moon. Paul Revere hand-carved those himself. Paul Revere was a man of many occupations. He was a blacksmith, a silversmith, a goldsmith, a tinsmith, a coppersmith, and also a dentist. He did false teeth for General George Washington and General Joseph Warren. And every time you see a picture of George Washington, he's never smiling. He was afraid his little white teeth would fall out. Across the street used to be the Hotel Rex. And the Hotel Rex had 2 types of rooms. He had a 40-cent room which had rats, and a 60-cent room which had rats. But the 60-cent room also had a private bat, a rat trap, and an extra piece of cheese to catch the rats. Thank you for listening.
When they moved to the North End, Italians tried to recreate the village that they came from. So they lived together in an apartment complex or across the street from paesani, people from the same general area.
When you came over, you wanted to replicate where you came from, so you stayed in your little niche. The grocery store, the bakery, everybody, you spoke your own dialect.
This was a family building. Yeah. This used to be the Romanos, the Scolas, then there was the Savardis, and then there was the Marinos and the Delios. So each had the whole building of all families.
And their whole family was in the building?
The whole family, which is unique.
This is 4 Fountain Place. This is where I was born. My first apartment was on the 2nd floor, I think. My Aunt Marcella lived on the 1st floor. My cousin Paul lived at 408, a couple buildings down. My cousin Louis and Jason lived in this building. My Nana lived on the 1st floor. This was the neighborhood in the neighborhood, right here.
My family, we all lived in the same 2-3 block area. I think my aunt on Cooper Street was the furthest away from us. The rest of them were on Endicott Street.
I think that gave them a lot of security, coming from a foreign land to here.
This end of Hanover Street was basically Sicilian. Fleet and Nord Street was fishermen. They call them from Sicily. Hi, Al. Endicott Street was a Villainese, and the middle was like all mixed.
There's a term in Italian called a campanalismo, which basically means people are part of the village if they live within the sound of the village church bell. And anyone that lived outside that was called a foreigner, or stranieri.
There were these very, very firm lines of demarcation. So even in a neighborhood like the North End, which is a very, very small geographic neighborhood, you very, very seldom crossed those lines of demarcation.
I came from what they say the other side of the north of Hanover Street, so I grew up on Prince and Salem. So if I was in this area, somebody would spot you and say, "What are you doing here? Get back," you know.
If you lived on Commercial Street and someone saw you on Cross Street, they'd say, "What are you doing on this end?" Amazing, because it's, what is the North End, about a quarter of a square mile.
We only dated each other. We didn't date a girl, I mean, forget it, trying to date one of the Salem Street girls.
If you look at the marriages that St. Leonard's Church and Sacred Heart Church did during the Great Immigration, they did about 20,000 marriages, and about 80% of them are from between people of the same region.
That's basically why the enclaves were created. I mean, it was a microcosm, it was comfort. They still had their paisani nearby.
Growing up here as a kid, it was, everybody was family.
We were very protected here. We did everything together and, you know, growing up in a very safe community, knowing everybody's parents, everybody's grandparents.
You had 100 mothers, 100 fathers, 100 uncles.
Life in those tenement houses was a very intense, loving relationship with people in the house. If someone needed someone to take care of a child after school because, for whatever reason, you would go and help that person. It was a very open, generous society of people who had very little, but would share it with you.
I can remember my grandmother telling me, "Gus, go across the street. Their husband lost his job, so bring them over this." And sure enough, I would bring them over whatever she had. If it was soup or a half a chicken or whatever, and I would bring it over. And they would return if they thought we were in need.
A very unique story in this neighborhood. My grandmother was 38 years old and was pregnant with her 9th child and actually died at childbirth. So there was an infant and 8 kids in the family, and 2 years later my grandfather died. So there were 9 kids and no parents. And back then, if the oldest child was older than the age of 14, they let the older children take care of the younger kids. The neighborhood, and being in this neighborhood, everybody taking care of each other, that they were able to survive. The siblings all took care of each other in like a 2-bedroom apartment. Not until I went out into the world after, you know, high school and then into college and into the business world did I actually realize that that's not the way everybody else lived. I was quite surprised.
Italians faced great discrimination here when they were assimilating because, number one, they didn't speak the language. Number two, they were dirt poor. And there's also sort of an ethnic piece. Most Italians from the South had dark skin. They were really perceived as a different race.
For many, jobs were hard to come by. Desperate to find work, Italians turned to the padroni.
Padroni were essentially contractors who promised Italian immigrants jobs in exchange for money. So oftentimes you would have padroni who would say, "Meet me on this corner at 7 o'clock in the morning," and nobody would be there.
There was very little recourse for victims of the padroni, spurring efforts to put an end to the padroni system. And these were led by a young but dynamic and influential North Ender.
George Ciliano, he is the first Italian-American elected to public office, period, in Boston in 1900. He was a real champion of Italian immigrants. And he succeeds in eliminating the largely corrupt padroni labor system. He also succeeds in getting regulations passed to regulate banks. And a lot of those banking regulations are with us today.
But there was another problem in the North End, one in which Ciliano also took the lead. This was the fight against the crime group known as the Black Hand.
The element in the North End was not the mafia. The mafia was Sicilian. The element was La Camorra, or La Mano Nera, the Black Hand, same thing. It was a Neapolitan underworld element.
The Black Hand would work by extortion. They would send threatening letters demanding money. Those who refused to pay were beaten and even killed. To stop them, Ciliano led a citizens' committee of North Enders who worked with the police to confront the Black Hand. As a result, he became a prime target of the group.
Ciliano was going after his own país, you know? He had threats on his life, serious threats on his life, a couple of attempts at murdering him.
Ciliano ignored the dangers and continued to oppose the Black Hand. This may have been the cause of his untimely death at just 32 years old.
Had a heart attack. There seems to be strong evidence that he was poisoned. But autopsies in those days were not quite what they are today.
On June 20th, 1906, 1,500 people lined the streets of the North End to honor the man who had done so much for the Italians of Boston. Among them was James Donnarumma, a friend of Ciliano, who was also active in helping the Italians adapt to life in America. He did this mainly through his newspaper, La Gazzetta del Massachusetts.
The newspaper helped them assimilate into the United States. It was in Italian, so they could read it, because you have to remember the Italians who came here didn't speak English.
Donnarumma wanted to create a memorial for Ciliano, and his idea to do so became a major controversy in Boston.
There is a strong move afoot by Italians in the neighborhood to rename very historic, venerable North Square, Boston's oldest square, one of the oldest squares in the whole country, to rename North Square to Ciliano Square. The person who leads that movement to rename it is James Donnarumma. But the press and the business community are outraged, and they mount a huge campaign against it. The Boston Globe is at the forefront of that campaign. They run lots of editorials and editorial cartoons that are very anti-Italian in nature. A representative of the Daughters of the American Revolution says, if you rename North Square, you might as well rename the USS Constitution. It is an outrage. And so North Square remains North Square, and it remains North Square today.
We had like 33,000 people living in a small area like this. I grew up in 2-bedroom apartments, you know what I mean? I slept with my brothers, my sister slept here.
In the apartment that we lived in, which was a 2-room apartment, they all slept in the 2 rooms. Now, if you can imagine 7 girls sleeping in one bed, 4 sleeping one way and 3 sleeping the other. And of course, my Uncle Mike, he had the other room, since he was the only boy in the family.
We were so many people living in the North End. We had to figure a way to get along, to survive, so we didn't kill each other.
I can recall one of the rooms was a bedroom with 2 double beds where 4 of us slept really close to each other. And I remember there was one drawer where we had our undergarments, and there was another drawer where we had our socks. Those were our socks and our undergarments, not my socks and my undergarments. And we had one big closet where all our clothes were in the closet. It was interesting.
Large families in small apartments was definitely common in the North End. It was also common for a family to live in the same apartment for years and even decades. Sam Viscione's mother, Caroline, residing at 33 Sheaf Street, is just one example of this.
Ma, put the lights on. This is Maureen. She's from the North End Historical Society.
Nice to meet you.
And,
I do not believe that you're 95 years old for one moment.
yeah.
So how many years have you been living here?
I lived here all my life.
Fabulous. It's beautiful.
You want us to look around?
Sure.
Come on. This is Sammy's little first bonnet set.
Yeah.
That's what they used to use in those days. This is my set when I got married.
My brother slept here, my mother and father slept here, and my grandfather and uncle slept in the
And the other side.
in the other
Oh,
side.
let's walk through.
This was the parlor. The furniture is quite old.
The furniture's over 100 years old. It was my mother's.
Beautiful.
I sleep over here now.
Oh, you do? How do you get up into that big bed?
I climb on.
My goodness.
It isn't nice.
My mother, the bed she sleeps in, was the bed she was born in. She did tell you that her mother's furniture was over 100 years old.
In the North End, we grew up with a lot of kids. Buildings were just teeming with children everywhere.
Schools, we were jam-packed, 50, 60 kids in a class.
There were 999 students, not 1,000. 999. We got so big that we took over the old Port Revere condominium school and we moved in there because we were bursting at the seams.
Our playground was in the street.
When we were very young, and I'm talking about 2, 3, 4 years old, our parents let us out on the street. It was full of North End kids, wherever you went.
We pitched baseball cards, we spun tops.
We played one game that it's my favorite, and that was called Buck Buck, How Many Fingers Up? And the object of the game is to 4 or 5 guys bend down and they would be in a row, and then they would have to hold you up. And you would hold up, how many fingers do you have up? Buck, buck. And if they guessed it, that means you were down the next time and they were up.
We had big wheels. We'd get on our big wheels, we'd go down to Charter, take a right on Greeno Lane, come back around, back up Hanover Street. Yeah, that was big stuff going around the block.
We played sidewalk games, hopscotch, hula hoop, marbles in the store covers. That was a lot of fun.
We played hide and seek. We were hiding behind automobiles and under automobiles, to be quite specific.
Scatter, that was another game. The only problem with scatter is if they didn't like you, they may never come to find you. So you never knew how long you would have to stay there.
There were so many boys, you know. We all had our corners.
The street corner was the meeting place.
Growing up, that's what we used to do. We used to hang around at the corner.
Absolutely, even during our generation, definitely.
There was always people gathering, conversation happening all night long.
We were street people, you know. Everybody knew everybody. We lived out the street.
I hung out right here, and we hung at the Elliott Playground. This was like our area.
We hung out at St. Anthony's Playground, and my gang, Mike Annunziata, Charlie Capola, Tomasoni, we were about 50. Now the kids from Salem Street, Eddie Rossi and Al Damasio and Mike Ponzo, they also hung out in the same playground because we were too many. So they had 50 in their gang. So here you have 100 in this tiny area.
It definitely was a street corner society. The street corners that I grew up on, you had the young guys, you had the older, then you had the middle-aged men that were talking American politics. Half the stuff was in English, half it was in Italian.
Life on street corners of the North End was studied by a young college graduate named William Foote White. Came to the North End in 1936 on a Harvard fellowship and lived at the corner of Hanover and Parmenter in a room provided by the owners of the Capri restaurant. White lived in the North End for 3.5 years, hanging on street corners and clubs and getting to know the people. The result was his now classic work of urban sociology, Street Corner Society. White showed that although crowded and impoverished, the North End was a socially organized Italian-American subculture with tightly interconnected families, corner groups, and political clubs working together to promote neighborhood cohesiveness and social mobility.
Street corner society, that came from the old country. You know, it was very stratified. You had your corner, he had his corner. Very much like Southern Italy. You were from this street, you were identified on that street, that was part of you. It's part of your identity. But you still were a North Ender, no matter what.
At our club, one of the evenings, the topic of nicknames came up. I started jotting the nicknames down, and within 45 minutes, I had compiled about 200 nicknames.
There was Wolfman. There was Pete the Plank. Sevens.
The Prob, Sweet Pea, that's one person.
There was Maki Cheesy. There was Justin the Sniper. Muhammad Ben Salad, because his last name is Ben Salah.
One got a nickname through athletic ability, physical appearance.
Sometimes it was something foolish that someone did or said.
My cousin's nickname was Bob. When he was young one day, he was doing something kind of foolish, I guess.
This guy Chimbo, he had a hunchback. I remember as a kid, and I used to use it myself. If you owed somebody money, you used to say, yeah, I'll pay you when Chimbo straightens out. You know, do you get it? The poor guy was a hunchback, but that's the way it was.
We had a great aunt in our family who chose to nickname just about everybody except her own children. My mother was Cookie. There was another cousin, Fudgy. Our Aunt Mickey, who's 93 now, is Mickey. There was another one, Taffy.
Nano, Canary.
And did you have a nickname?
I did, I was Wolfman.
I had the best nickname, the Greaser. Because then, when I go back to Italy, I was the American.
There's so many people growing up in a small area, and everyone had almost the same name. There's 3 Vito Luyas in my family. So you had to tell them apart. So Joe the Rat was different than his cousin, Joe, John the Bear or Joe the Bear or something like that.
If you tell me their real names, a lot of them, I won't know who they are. It was always the nicknames.
We were at a reunion, and I was sitting next to a very good friend of mine, John Rapucci. He said, who's that next to so-and-so? And I said, that's Richie Palumbo. He said, no, the green tie. That's Richie Palumbo. That doesn't sound right to me, Victor. Did he have a nickname? And I say, yeah, that's Jake the Bloke. And that's all I had to say. We were in our 40s at the time, and he never knew that person's real name was Richie Palumbo.
Food is extremely important to the family in the Italian household. The kitchen table or the dining room table is where everything of importance happens in an Italian family. Everything.
When I think about the food, the first thing that comes to my mind are aromas. A stew cooking like a veal spezzado.
If you walk the streets of the North End in the old days, the windows were open. You can smell the meatballs, you know what I mean? You can smell the gravy, and if you happen to stop in there and went up, sit down and eat. Famous words, sit down and eat. That's everything is eat. That's why, and they used to tell me, eat, Johnny. Then when I got fat, they said, why don't you stop it? Why don't you make up your mind, you know?
I can remember well my mother making and frying the meatballs, and of course I always managed to steal 1 or 2 prior to it going in the gravy. And then as the gravy was being made, you'd be dipping fresh bread into the gravy while it was being made. As a matter of fact, when my wife makes gravy and meatballs, I do the same thing. I always manage to steal 1 or 2 meatballs and dip the bread in the gravy.
We in the North End, by the way, never called it tomato sauce. It was always gravy. As distinguished from if you wanted to have like a roast beef with gravy, then it would be meat gravy.
It was always gravy. Everybody made it different, and there was no recipe. You know, just a pinch of this, a little of that.
I used to make pasta, lasagna. I used to buy a big loin, and I used to make a pocket, and I used to stuff it, and I used to bake it with the potatoes.
We made everything.
They would make raviolis, and then they used to dry them out on the bed, and we used to sleep on the floor.
I used to put all clean sheets and everything.
As a 7th grader, I was fortunate enough to be accepted to Boston Latin School. And one of the things that really stood out was lunchtime. My lunches were exquisite. Greasy brown bag lunch with a greasy broccoli rabe or Italian tuna fish sandwich. For my classmates who had maybe a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or ham and cheese. That was like, you know, where did you get that? I've never seen a sandwich like that.
Our best friend in high school was an Irish kid. My mother used to make an extra meatball sandwich every day so I could feed him. He used to think it was like the greatest thing in the world. They never seen anything like it.
There used to be a Wonder Bread factory in Charlestown. And you would be able to buy day-old loaves of bread for like a nickel a dime. So I went back and told my mother. I said, Ma, you can buy it. It looks like Bond bread would look like. What are you, crazy? You can't eat that kind of bread. You'll die. Why, Ma? It's not like an Italian bread, Gus. You gotta have a hard crust on the outside. I said, I'll remember that, Ma. I'll remember that.
Sundays were a very, very special day for us. Family would be there. Married children would come back to mother's house and bring their children if they had any, and there'd be 10, 15 people for Sunday dinner every Sunday.
Every Sunday, you went over your grandmother's house, you ate macaroni every Sunday. All the family came over.
There had to be about 22 people in a 3-room apartment at one time. There was probably 4 generations.
We used to eat in shifts.
In shifts, everywhere. We'd sit on a bed, we'd sit on a chair, we'd stand up in the corner. It was insane,
We
but
had
it
a
was...
leaf from the kitchen table that my brother Peter, Bob, used to put over the arms of the easy chair in the parlor, and that was his table in front of the TV.
Sunday was my most favorite day of the week. Go to 9 o'clock Mass at St. Stephen's Church, dressed to the nines. The North Enders are famous for their sartorial splendor, always looking to get dressed up in their Sunday best and having a great Sunday dinner. After church, I stopped in and had a meatball in one apartment, dunked a piece of hard, crusty Italian bread in a bubbling pot of Italian gravy in another, have a ravioli in a third place, piece of veal or lamb in a neighbor's house. It was just a wonderful, wonderful day, spending time with food and with family. 2 very, very important things for Italian kids growing up in the North End.
Sports was a big thing. Basketball, softball, baseball. This is what a lot of the kids down there live for growing up.
They used to play ball. They used to break the windows. Carrie, Sammy broke the window. All right, take it to Louis on Hanover Street, have it fixed.
We played wiffle ball this way, long way. This was home plate, right here. Home runs were over that grate right there.
We played ball right on the streets, football on the streets, baseball down in North End Park.
Boxing was also very popular in the North End. Many kids took to the gloves, but none was more famous or furious than the 1955 welterweight champion of the world, Tony DeMarco.
When did they put the statue up?
It's been about 4 years now.
2011?
Something like that.
My name is Tony DeMarco. I was born on Fleet Street. We lived at 13 Fleet Street. My 2 sisters, my brother, myself, and actually my mother and father. I was 95 pounds when I first started fighting. And I was fighting in boys' clubs. Boys' clubs of Nazaro Center in the North End. Nazaro Center is still located there.
And how old were you? Your first pro fight, how old were you?
16 years old.
16?
I was champion of all the boys' clubs in Boston. I was knocking people out, youngsters out, you know, in the fight game. I was good. And someone from my street took a liking to me and questioned me if I wanted to be a fighter. I said, I am a fighter. And would you like to fight amateurs? I said, I'll fight anybody and anything. You know, you had to make your own way. We didn't have that much going for us.
All right, Tony, how you doing, buddy?
Nice to see you.
I see you all the time on Channel 3.
Hey,
Channel
listen.
3.
Still the champ.
We're on television here, baby.
The best.
We're on television.
Nobody better.
All right, Gumba.
All right,
Grazie. I started fighting professionally in '48. And I liked training in the North End on Fleet Street. I was struggling for a lot of years. And finally, I became a main eventer. And then came the opportunity to fight Johnny Saxton.
Saxton to the right of your screen, DeMarco to the left. Now in round 4, the action is furious. Here in round 14, DeMarco is in full control. DeMarco finally puts the champion down. Saxton gets up.
I wish he stayed now because he staggered up. He had no conception of what's going on.
Saxton is taking too much punishment, unable to defend himself, and the referee stops the fight. Tony DeMarco wins the welterweight championship of the world.
After the fight, I went right home to Fleet Street because I knew my mother and father was waiting for me. My house there was filled with their friends and my friends to celebrate my championship victory.
When he won the championship, Fleet Street was like New York City at a ticker tape parade. The city lit up all night long. The whole North End was out to welcome Tony. We were so happy to have a champion. We had a champion of the world in the North End. Unbelievable.
I saw my father and I saw my mother. They were so proud. I mean, you know, they wouldn't see me fight because they never went to see me fight. But my sisters did. It was great.
How do you think it looks, all right?
Oh, I think it's good, yeah. The famous Furious Fleet Street. I'm flattered.
And now he's the champ, right? People call you the champ.
Thank you.
That's what I call you.
Baseball has always been my sport of choice. And since the early 60s, the North End Athletic Association has had an amazing baseball program, run by coaches who are now neighborhood legends.
The iconic coach is Dom DiMaggio Campacaro. He really spent and still spends a lot of time with the youth in the North End.
As you all know, the game tonight, we are playing in honor of an NEAA and North End icon, Coach Dom Joseph Campacaro. Let's hear it for Dom.
When I was a kid, I used to do my own thing, so I really didn't get involved in too much of the community stuff at that point in time. As I got older, about 17, 18, 19 years old, I started to coach the kids.
Dom coached me 60 years ago in Little League, and he also coached in we had a pony league, which is like the Babe Ruth League today, and he was, the way he is today, he was the same back then. He was always hard. He always made us do the right thing. I really can't say enough about him. He was the best.
So you coached all these guys?
This is Dante Sr., Dante Jr., and Dante Jr. double parentheses.
The third.
Put him in.
The third.
The third.
Dom was very strict compared to the other coaches in the league. We had to have our hats on a certain way, tucked in. The other coaches really didn't care about that stuff, but the stuff he did for the North End was unbelievable.
Dom was very, very animated, very, very loud. You know, when you talk about a North End guy, he's one of those guys. The way he talks, the way he acts, just really a good guy, community guy. He'd be down there at 8 o'clock in the morning, you'd do baseball, but he'd hang around all day, and he would wear a baseball uniform. He'd wear the pants, the stirrups, the hat, the whole thing, the belt, like he was playing ball. And you'd see him Saturday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd still have his uniform on. You know what I mean? He'd drive around in his electrical van, and he'd have his uniform on.
Dom Campacaro coached me in Babe Ruth. Dom's a good man, always cared about the kids, the program, and also loves baseball, I think, almost more than anything. And he made sure that we all learned how to play the game right. And And if I can quote one of his lines, tuck your shirt in, meat.
There you go.
All right, Tom, we love you.
All right, John. Thank you, John.
Guys, I appreciate everybody who come down, my old crew, the young crew, you young kids. Play hard, do the best you can. Whatever you do is the best. And don't give up. Just keep on going and going and going. Don't give up on your dream. The way they got things out today, you can go a long way in sports, especially for girls. Girls, get out there and play and participate and take part in these events because you only come through once. And I'll tell you, everybody that's sitting in the stands, if they could come back again, they would do it again. So enjoy yourself, have a great time, congratulations, play hard, do the best you can. I love yous all, thank you very much. I could say more, but I'm not.
In Napoli, where love is king.
Music was also big in the North End, especially doo-wop and a cappella. And one of the best and beloved groups was our very own Street Magic.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. That's amore.
There was an awful lot of street corner harmony groups in the neighborhood, and as growing up, I would listen to them. They had such a unique sound, and it was a very captivating sound.
Down, 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 down.
I was always into black music. I loved the 50s, the doo-wop era. I started running doo-wop shows in the CC Center over here. One of the groups, Carmen Federico, was playing. He had his own group, but they weren't into doo-wop. One day he stopped me in the street. He says, "Joe, we're thinking of starting a group. Me, Stephen Gambale, and a couple of the kids." And he got into a cappella. I was married with children and everything. I says, "All right, I'll meet you in the playground." And it sounded good. I said, "Geez," I says, "maybe I should sing with these kids."
Do what you do. Boom, 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 boom. I always like you.
This whole thing started with a street corner and some wine. If it was a summer evening, we'd go grab some beverages and start to sing.
One of us came up with the name. I don't know if someone says, "Wow, that's like magic," and maybe it just popped to say Street Magic, because that's what we sang in the street. Street corners. As we got better, we did weddings, the girl showers, anniversaries, and then we started doing clubs. Years went by, I was getting older and I was into my business contract and I just didn't have the time anymore.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore.
That's my connection back to the neighborhood with Street Magic. I can close my eyes and think back the neighborhood as it once was, and I feel very blessed that I'm able to relive it.
That's amore. That is love.
On June 13th, 1965, I got married and moved on to Medford. That's what was in the cards for most of my contemporaries at the time.
We moved to Medford in August of 1954.
I moved out. I had two houses. I had over here and I had a house up in Maine.
Why did we move?
Spread your wings a little bit.
Yeah, prosperity, parking was an issue, and of course, parking probably was the major issue as I reflect.
There was a time that it was very popular to move out to the suburbs, and people thought that that was the right thing to do, and for their family, it was.
While some Italian families were moving to the suburbs, others remained. In addition, there was a large influx of new Italian immigrants that began in the 1950s and continued into the 80s.
The 67, the early 70s, there was a big income of Italian immigrants.
When I first came, I was 5 years old, spoke no English, and it still felt like I was still in Italy because there was so many Italians. I was surrounded by so many Italians that spoke my dialect, so it felt like I never really left.
I came here for a master in journalism at BU, and I walked down Hanover Street. To me, it's like a walk in the main street of my town in Italy. The idea of coming to a neighborhood to meet others, to watch soccer, to have a haircut, to have a decent espresso, which in this country, it's still a very rare thing to find. Thank God there's a place like this.
In fact, the proportion of Italian-born to American-born in the North End in the 1970s was about the same as it was in the 1930s.
As the immigration continued and people were still coming over from Italy, it was another wave of a reminder of what the culture was.
In the 70s and 80s, growing up, the North End was an Italian neighborhood still. We used to have butchers and grocery stores and little candy shops and corner shops.
There was Sonny's Bakery was down here on the left, Giro's Restaurant. My grandfather had bar here. The Bostonite grocery store was there. Marion Perez had a coffee shop across the street. Bettinati's was a grocery store at the corner of Hanover Ave in Hanover.
Tons of kids playing in the Gassy or the St. Anthony's playground.
There was kids everywhere. And we went to Mass, Saturday Mass, 5 o'clock. Like, a lot of the kids in the neighborhood participated.
In the 70s, you had a whole population of elders that still lived in that old European lifestyle that they had brought from the old country at the turn of the century. They still had rooftop gardens where they would still tend their vegetables and grow their grapes. They still made wine in their cellars. It was a wonderful culture that was very much alive when I got there. I didn't realize that it was going to change very, very quickly.
In the 80s, you know, we start seeing new people, who's in law school, and still in the 80s, rents were relatively reasonable. So you had students still, you know, so you had some students here, like, you know, Suffolk Law's down the street, Suffolk University's down the street, Emerson College.
Outsiders trickled in, students usually, people who were working in the city. Outsiders was a pretty generic term that any North Ender would use to someone who came in that they didn't know, because all they knew pretty much was their friends and their families. Certainly if you came from another neighborhood, they knew you weren't a North Ender.
People came in, they just loved the neighborhood. They loved the fact that, you know, you could walk down the street and be safe and have dinner in one of our wonderful and famous restaurants.
I think the outsiders did respect the neighborhood very much and understood the culture that was there and didn't want to do anything to hurt it or certainly to get in the way of anyone. But the tension between the outsiders and the North Enders played itself out in the housing problems. I ended up in the North End in 1978. I answered a job ad in the Globe saying, work in one of America's oldest anti-poverty agencies, work in a community setting, must speak Italian. And there I was, in charge of the North End Senior Citizen Center. There were many elders in the neighborhood who living on fixed income where they could only afford maybe $70 or $80 a month. You had even poor landlords in the neighborhood who were Italian Americans, who were long-time North Enders who would never throw their tenants out. But what happened was the mayor and the city administration decided to develop the waterfront. All those rat-infested warehouses and those broken down old buildings that were in shambles now suddenly became condominiums. And then the speculators, of course, now moved into the North End and began offering these unheard of prices to landlords.
Many of the newcomers, instead of renting, were buying properties. This was a significant change because well into the 70s, the North End was a red line neighborhood. Banks were reluctant to provide financial services to those wanting to invest in the area.
The North End imploded in a way. You had people that could easily afford these homes, displacing people who had been on fixed incomes and had lived in their apartments. Some of the landlords, the reason why they sold was because they couldn't keep, taxes had gone up. A woman I knew had been in an apartment for 46 years, all of a sudden being told by her Italian-American landlady that, I'm sorry, I'm sold the house. I can't keep the house up anymore. You have to leave.
We were talking about this a little while ago. I got married in '61 and the rent was $30 a month. The same apartment now, 48 years later, is $1,500 a same apartment. That's all they did was put some plaster and paint it.
They built subsidized housing as fast as they could to warehouse a lot of these elderly people, which a lot of the old people didn't like. I remember one woman telling me, you know, Anthony, I don't want to go to that new house. She said, I like the way my floors creak. She said, I feel like when I go to that subsidized housing, I feel like I'm in a hospital.
It was bound to happen, don't you think so?
We're close to train stations. We're close to downtown. People move here. They can walk to work.
Yeah,
So property value is worth money. Someone shows up and says, I'll give you $500,000 for your building. What do you think an Italian immigrant who came here 30 years ago, broke his back laying brick, says,
oh, sure,
you're going to give me $500,000?
I'll take it and I'll go to Revere.
Give me the check.
Piece of land.
Yeah, I'll have a garden in my backyard.
Have a garden in the backyard. That was my father's dream.
The North End has gone through tremendous gentrification. It's dramatically different now.
I saw a lot of my friends leave, and a lot of the people I knew that I would see every day go.
At one time it was families, now it's a student. I'm here 54 years, and if I stand in front of the door, I am a stranger.
See these girls, they probably play some softball for Suffolk University. So it's like, before, if they were here, it was like they were an anomaly. Now it's like, I'm an anomaly. It's like, what? You live here your whole life? You've been in the same building? When I tell people I've been in the same building my whole life, it's like their head explodes.
You could see somebody every morning for a year. You could keep saying good morning, and they don't answer. Once in a while, you might get a hi. But most of the time...
You want to laugh? The neighborhood Catholic high school, right? And across the street was the gym, the CC Center, the Christopher Columbus Center. $1 million condos, $1 million condos.
It's $700 a square. If you want to buy a condo in the North End, it's $700 a square foot right now.
Imagine that a square foot.
Square foot. An apartment that's 1,000 square feet is $700,000.
Money has definitely changed things here. You can't have that neighborhood store anymore because it just doesn't make sense. You're being priced out, and you sense a lot of resentment.
I've seen restaurants take the place of cafes, which is not a good thing. I mean, a restaurant is a place where you go, you sit down, you don't interact with the other people there that much, and you gotta spend money. A cafe, you can go there with $2, you can spend that morning there. $2 and you can talk to everybody, you know what I mean? It's different.
Now every store is a restaurant, and the best food we have is at our houses. You know? And like people ask me, "Wow, you're from the North End? You must go to all the restaurants." No, I don't go. My wife is a fantastic cook.
So we've been asking everybody, do you still think it's an Italian neighborhood?
I don't think the North End is still an Italian neighborhood, no, no. Other than the restaurants, I mean, there's some of us are left, but the values are gone.
No, it's not really Italian, no. It has lost that character to a great extent. I see the North End becoming more like Beacon Hill. In other words, people mind their business there, they walk their dogs, you know, that type of, not like the old North End where everybody got involved in everybody's life.
To me, the North End is still an Italian neighborhood. I think that our culture has survived longer than any other culture that preceded the Italians in this neighborhood. You're talking about a younger generation that's still doing things in a very traditional way with a little modern twist.
It's remained an Italian neighborhood. I'll tell you why. Because all the businesses you see, the majority of them are owned by Italians or old school North End people that have been here for generations. For example, if you go to Hanover Street, you'll see Umberto's. Those guys have been there for a long time. They don't live in the neighborhood anymore, but they still own it and they still operate it as, you know, if they were living here.
I believe it's an Italian neighborhood because of the churches that are still here, the traditions that go on every year with the different feasts that we have. A young neighbor of mine who owns his property across the street has become friends with a lot of the North End guys, and they made him an honorary member this year of St. Anthony's Feast. And that really made me feel good, because my own son is 25, and he's very protective of the North End and the way we live. And I was glad for him to see that someone in his generation can come here and be as respectful as I hope that he is on a daily basis to the neighborhood and to his friends and family.
For an outsider coming, it's an Italian neighborhood still, and it's what you would want as a tourist to see, wow, it's Italian. But it's less Italian, or less, I shouldn't say less Italian, it's less North End. You know, the North End we grew up with, but it's still my neighborhood. I still see it as that. I walk to work, and every morning I see someone I know, which is nice. So it's still that sense of community and neighborhood. And even newcomers, like I know people who've been here 30, 35, 40 years, you know, they just happen not to be born in the North End, but in all intents and purposes, they're probably a North Ender.
Today marks the day of a new beginning. Today marks day one of the next 100 years of this feast.
Today, it's much different, but I think better. It's exciting. It's exciting to see how excited they are about our neighborhood. Today, I'm proud of it. I mean, I really am.
It's a privilege now to live in one of these buildings the way we do. But I hope 20 years from now,
we're still here, yeah.
The feast is still a very important part of the North End.
And may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon these waters and remain with them forever. Amen.
It's about family, it's faith, it's tradition, it's friendship.
Right now is our annual Italian American of the Year Award. So, without further ado, the son of the neighborhood, the former undisputed world welterweight champion of the world, Tony D'Amato.
The North End is home. The North End is comfort. We have another different generations coming in, but it's still the North End. And there's still 100 Italian restaurants in the North End. And to tell you the truth, I've been to all of them. And look at me, I'm put on weight.
You like living here?
Yeah.
Why?
There's good ice cream places here.
What else?
Because I like it here.
One thing that I take great pleasure in is that my kids get to grow up in the same neighborhood I grew up in. I love that my daughter goes to the Elliott School, and so did my father. I love that my son is a downtown guy. Gets on the train, goes to school, takes the train home. The biggest lessons I ever learned in my life were really growing up in the neighborhood. It's still the greatest neighborhood in the country. It's still the greatest neighborhood in the world. And I think in 100 years, it's still going to be.
North End of Boston, living was mighty good. We grew up believing